It gives me immense pleasure to welcome everyone this afternoon on the occasion of a talk by one of our fellows, Dr. Iliyas Husain, on a very interesting, important, and I hope thought-provoking subject for all of us, uh, linguistic cartography and the construction of linguistic identities in 19th century colonial India. Dr. Iliyas Husain is currently a fellow with us, and he has been teaching at the Department of History and Culture, Jamia Millia Islamia. Earlier, he has taught at Motilal Nehru College also. So, I extend a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Iliyas Husain on this occasion, and I welcome once again everyone on this occasion. The topic on which he is making his presentation today, that is the topic of his fellowship research here, and he has already made one presentation on the subject, but this one is very different from what he had spoken about the last time. As we are aware, it was in the 19th century that the linguistic cartography of India gradually came into existence, starting with the work of comparative linguistics in the late 18th century done by people like William Jones and others. Then in the 19th century, this was taken up further by some Orientalists and many civil servants of British origin in various parts of India. Important names there were, of course, of people like Caldwell, and gradually a theory was formulated that the Indian subcontinent can not only be divided in terms of religion, caste, etc., but also in terms of languages. You could have a more or less neat division of one linguistic groups, broad linguistic groups, that is Indo-Aryan versus Dravidian at the top, then specific languages within these two groups, and then sub-languages, and of course dialects, bolis, etc. And of course there were other minor groups of, I may not remember all the names now, but Proto-Australoid and Munda languages and those kind of groups were also formulated in the 19th century. So I believe this was a part of the knowledge production exercise of the colonial regime in India. Now, the point, as we have been making here earlier also, is that it is not as if the entire knowledge created by the colonial bureaucracy and the colonial state in India is to be automatically rejected, but it has to be kept in mind that there was a logic behind the knowledge that they were trying to create. There were certain motives behind it, there was a certain process followed, and that is very well reflected in the linguistic cartography, as I believe Dr. Iliyas Husain is going to talk about. Now, before the 19th century, this kind of course, there was an understanding in our society that there are differences in languages across this country, and they were bound to be there in such a vast country after all. In terms of language, cultures, and other things, there were bound to be differences. Even in France, by the way, I mean, I don't know, many of you might be familiar, but because I have studied the subject, I can say this, that the French that is spoken, the standard French that is spoken today, it was not the language of the whole of France even as late as 17th or 18th century. In fact, there were so many, there is that French word called patois, P-A-T-O-I-S, which means a dialect, or as we will call boli. So there were hundreds of these patois in France, in what is today France, and it is the language around Paris. which gradually evolved as the standard French language, and that standard French language was then institutionalized in the 18th and 19th century, especially after the French Revolution, after the demise of the Ancien regime, and then of course it was taught in schools, colleges, universities. But before that, it is only a very microscopic elite who had cultivated that supposedly standard language. And France is, as we used to learn in our school days, if we take undivided Madhya Pradesh, whose area was roughly 4.5 lakh square kilometers, France's geographical area is 5.5 lakh square kilometers. So we used to learn in school that Madhya Pradesh is somewhat smaller than France. So you can imagine that in a country which is roughly the size of one Indian state, there were so many dialects, there was so much diversity. But of course that diversity in the process of modernization got sort of eroded, and today we see a different kind of thing. But historically, when we go back, we find that there was a different kind of past also which was available there. So this is just one example, of course, but in the 19th century, as Dr. Iliyas Husain is going to talk about, there was an entire imperial project of creating knowledge about Indian languages, Indian culture, Indian civilization as a whole, and there were certain agendas and motives behind it. Of course, we should not dismiss, as I said, all the knowledge that has been created in the process, but we must understand the connection between ideology and functionality when it comes to the British rule in India, and I believe that is what he is going to talk about, because let us also remember that we are living with most of the consequences of British knowledge production of 18th and 19th century. In fact, many of our assumptions, presumptions behind who we are, either as a nation or as a community or as a caste or as a religion or as a linguistic group, ethnic group, unconsciously we derive them from British knowledge, from European knowledge as a whole. And we of course think that this is all our knowledge and it is all correct. I am not questioning, maybe it is correct, maybe it is not, and that is why we have the lecture of Dr. Iliyas Husain today. He has worked very hard on this subject, he has been discussing it with me, and it has been a pleasure for me personally to have discussed this subject with him on so many occasions. So now, without taking further time, I would like to request him to proceed with his lecture.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Mishra, who offered me this fellowship, and such a good introduction for this talk he has given. I delighted to learn a lot from his introduction as well. So thank you very much, sir, and thank you, my fellow colleagues here and others who present here. This is a topic on which I am going to speak today: the emergence of linguistic cartography in India and the construction of linguistic identities. This is a vast topic which I am working here. So I try to pick some threads from the research I am doing and try to put some ideas. However, I don't know whether they are framed correctly or not, but try to put some ideas in front of you, so to give a picture how linguistic cartographies or linguistic maps were prepared, and what was the objective of colonial scholars behind that. A lot of discussion may be proceed on the basis of these studies. For example, the issue of Orientalism, colonialism, and others may be discussed. I won't go in detail of those theoretical discussion. I would try to put in front of you the material which is actually processed by me, and try to put some argument on the basis of that. Then we can proceed on further discussion. So first of all, linguistic cartography was not a separate discipline. Linguistic cartography is a part of linguistic studies, which was actually the linguistic studies which carried out by philologists, later linguistics, the term linguistics were used. So philologists actually tried to prepare some map in their works to visualize their study. So linguistic cartography is part of linguistic studies. Cartography also evolved in 19th century with the establishment of trigonometry. Uh, uh, that process was actually associated with the mapping of land, with the mapping of land for the collection of revenue in the late 18th century. Then it developed in the establishment of trigonometric survey in the early 19th century. So with the emergence of that knowledge, with the emergence of cartographic knowledge, language maps transform. So what was the state of cartographic practice in India? Matthew H. Eden, who has worked on the making of cartography in India, wrote, the map making process and the resulting maps are in turn dependent on acculturated conception of space. Acculturated conception of space, as with any other form of representation, graphic or textual, artifactual and ephemeral, meaning is invested in all aspects of cartography. In the instrumentation and technologies wielded by the geographer, in the social relation with which maps are made and used, and in the cultural expectation which define and which are defined by the map image. So map or cartography has some specific feature, some specific thing. Similarly, the making of linguistic map must be seen as a process of providing new meaning to space, to linguistic space. The regions were identified with a particular language and in extension to a particular culture as well, different, dissimilar, extraordinary, and sometimes even contrary to each other. For example, in the case of Indo-Aryan and Dravidian, the linguistic cartography constructed new identities in this way of depiction of language on an Indian map. So this was the background. However, linguistic studies, as we know very well, began with the missionaries study. Missionaries started studying Indian languages. Then after the conquest of Bengal, a lot of administrators also studied Indian languages, and all these people wrote grammars as dictionaries of Indian languages. These grammars and dictionaries were actually new kind of grammar and dictionaries, which evolved in early modern time in Europe. That kind of grammars were written. These new grammars were not the grammars, they were not similar to the grammar of Panini. They were new grammars, new kind of grammar, modern grammars were actually written. So in the late 18th century, we do not find specific cartographic practices. So no great cartographic practices were applied to create linguistic maps in late 18th as well as early 19th century. The Linguistic Survey of India in the early 20th century was the first exercise to survey Indian languages, spoken Indian languages in most part of India. However, southern India, Madras Presidency was excluded from the Linguistic Survey of India. So early linguistic maps were usually prepared by linguists, as we have discussed, and linguistic maps were, however, prepared on the basis of growing knowledge. So this, the linguistic map show a trajectory, show a process in that process. What I argue first, that when we talk about the study of linguistics, our focus usually remain on the administrator. For example, William Jones, Halhead, Wilkins, or E.W. Ellis. But missionaries also played very important role in the linguistic studies. So I pointed out that there are two varieties of linguistic studies. One may be called administrator orientalist, other may be called missionary orientalist. So the administrator orientalist, who was this administrator orientalist? Soon after the conquest of Bengal, the conquest of language was needed to consolidate the colonial rule. There are examples of a scholar who were working on languages. They have given immense evidence to show that conquest of language was required for consolidation of colonial rule. So British produced handbooks, guidebooks, and teaching aids for company employees. Many administrators were involved in this process. We can identify a few of them: William Jones, N.B. Hallett, John B. Gilchrist, where some F.W. Ellis was another, who wrote earliest dictionaries and grammars of Indian languages. They mostly learned what is the difference between these two category of, these two variety of linguistic studies. Linguistic studies of administrator orientalist and linguistic studies of missionary orientalist. Administrator orientalist actually focused on the written text, on the literature of that language. To pursue a language, to follow a language, they mostly focused on the literary text. What was the approach of missionary orientalist? Missionaries started entering India from 15th century onward. First Catholic came, then others came, then Protestant came. Some of the earliest work on Indian languages were actually produced by them. Almost every Indian language, especially its spoken form, was first studied by a missionary. The Protestant missionary, with the objective to translate religious text, focused on the spoken form of the language. So their approach was very much different from the administrator. But in the production of linguistic knowledge, their concerns were not much different from the administrator orientalist. This aspect has been lagged in most studies on or Orientalism, that missionaries' concerns are objective, were also associated with administrator, they also have an aspect of colonialism as well as Orientalism. The Serampur missionary William Carey was an example of this category. So there are few works I show here, which are prepared by administrator orientalist. For example, this was the first work on Persian grammar. It was written in 1771 by William Jones, a grammar of the Persian language. Why a grammar of Persian language was written as a first text of or a first grammar of any Indian language? Because Persian was the most sought language by the colonial administration. Persian was the language of Mughal rule. So Persian was the most sought language. They wanted to learn Persian. So William Jones, who was merely at the age of 23 or 24, wrote this grammar. And with the writing of this grammar, he became so popular that he was given membership of Royal Asiatic Society of London. He was often called Oriental John or Persian John, he was called. Somewhere else I have argued that his study of Persian played very important role in the origin of Indo-European family. He compared his Persian grammar with Sanskrit grammar actually, which however he did not explain, however he did not revealed it, but actually he used Persian knowledge and he compared it with Sanskrit to reach on the conclusion of Indo-European family. This is the new thing which I propose. I have not seen any other scholar on William Jones have written this point. So a Persian grammar was written. A dictionary of Persian and Arabic was written by John Richardson. William Jones played very important role. He helped actually John Richardson to prepare this dictionary. This was also so dictionary and grammar. These two became the chief tool to understand a language, to command a language, to conquest a language. The best tool were actually dictionaries and grammars. Simultaneously, a grammar of the Bengal language written by, it was written by Halhed. Halhed, we know that Halhed, he also wrote a code of Gentulas. We know he learned Persian. He did not know Sanskrit. But in this grammar also, he argued that we should control language. We should develop some command over the local language. So uh, uh, the ruled, we should develop a just rule. We should rule through the means of native. He argued in this grammar as well. So what Jones wrote in the Persian grammar is actually very interesting. In the introduction, he wrote, what he wrote, the servant of company received letters which they could not read and were ambitious of gaining title of which they could not comprehend the meaning. It is found highly dangerous to employ the native as interpreters upon whose fidelity they could not depend. So very clearly the intention was very clear that control over the knowledge is required to consolidate the colonial rule. Further, he wrote, the language of Asia will now perhaps be, through this Persian grammar, he wrote, the language of Asia will now perhaps be studied with uncommon ardor. They are known to be useful and will soon be found instructive and entertaining. The valuable manuscripts that enrich our public libraries will be in a few years elegantly printed. The manners and sentiment of Eastern nation will be perfectly known, and the limit of our knowledge will be no less extended than the bounds of our empire. Clearly, imperialism and colonialism was playing its role in the preparation of this kind of knowledge. Similarly, Halhed wrote in the preface of Bengal grammar, by the most formal act of authority in the establishment of a Supreme Court of Justice, it means Bengal has professedly incorporated with the British Empire. Much, however, still remain for the completion of this grand work, and we may reasonably presume that one of its most important desiderata is the cultivation of a right understanding of a general medium of intercourse between the government and its subject, between the natives of Europe who are to rule and the inhabitant of India who are to obey. So, how these introduction shows that that colonial conquest was not simply the conquest of, it was not simply the political conquest of India, it was the conquest of culture. It was the conquest of knowledge. Through the conquest of language, through the conquest of knowledge, it was perceived that colonialism could become strong. It can be consolidated. Missionary Orientalists, however, started their journey by writing grammars. This is the page of the first Tamil grammar written in Latin by Beshi in 15th century, perhaps in early 16th century. Later, Beshi has written Tamil English dictionary also. He was an Italian, but he wrote a Tamil English dictionary because it was more worthful. It was not first printed in 1870 as this is written here. It was first published in 16th century. But the most important part actually played by Protestant missionaries, in which William Carey may be given the credit, and Serampur missionary should be given the most credit for learning, for studying Indian languages, especially which are usually called vernacular languages of India. But the first book he has written on Sanskrit language. He has written a grammar of Sanskrit language because William Carey also perceived the idea that Sanskrit is the mother language, so it must be understood first, so all other Indian languages must be understood. He wrote a dictionary of Bengali language, he wrote a grammar of Bengali language, he wrote a grammar of Marathi language, as well as a Telugu language. He wrote as many grammars, approximately he wrote a dozen grammars of Indian languages. So, what was the practice of missionaries at Serampur? The first aspect was translation. Why these Indian languages were studied? The prime cause was translation. William Carey himself translated Bible into Marathi, Hindi, Odia, Punjabi, Assamese and Gujarati, at least half a dozen languages. With the help of Indian, as usually with the help of Indian, there was a practice to publish memoir by the Serampur missionary, in which it was revealed that how much Indian languages are actually learned by Serampur missionaries, various missionaries, how much languages are learned, and how much religious sacred text was translated in Indian languages. So a memoir which was published, it was perhaps the sixth memoir, a memoir which was published in 1816 to report the progress of translation of sacred scriptures, contained the Lord's Prayer in 33 languages. Mostly, these were mostly spoken languages of India. However, they include Sanskrit, Chinese and Burman language, but mostly Indian languages, Marathi, Telugu, Punjabi, Sindhi, these were the languages. The second aspect of missionary Orientalist was to write grammars. And what he wrote in the preface of Sanskrit grammar is very similar to the administrator Orientalist studies. William Carey wrote, the curious in Europe have hitherto been precluded from the study of Sanskrit through the want, the spelling he has given is used here, through the want of elementary books in a language which they could understand, and even in India, the difficulty have been so great that few have attempted it, and fewer still have preserved a sufficient time to acquire it. A desire to remove these obstacles and in some measure to contribute to the knowledge of this branch of Oriental literature have, among other reasons, occasioned the present work. So he was not thinking that he was working only for missionary activity. He was also contributing in the Orientalist knowledge. Now we come to the first map. The first map was actually prepared by Serampur missionary. It was prepared in 1822, and it was prepared after the seventh memoir. Till the seventh memoir, it was written in 1820. Approximately 44 Indian languages have been studied by missionaries. So in this first map, what we found that North India is very much divided in a lot of languages. A lot of languages actually which were later called dialects. The North India is divided in many languages. South India is also divided in some languages. However, Serampur missionary has less information of South Indian languages than it has knowledge of North Indian languages. So this was the first map. So you may find, you can see this area. This area is vehemently divided in many languages. This particular area, which was later argued that by other scholar, John B. Gilchrist, that this is the area which has a lingua franca Hindustani. So he used the term Hindustani and it became a very important language. However, Gilchrist saw two kind of Hindustani, and he has identified these two kind of Hindustani with two religions, Hindus and Muslims. He argued this is well known history of Gilchrist, and Gilchrist is often seen as a divider of Hindi and Urdu. He actually seen as a maker of these two languages through his study. But in the Serampur missionary, which was working on the Indian vernacular languages, till the 1820, the languages which were depicted were actually Indian vernacular languages. So the idea, the difference, the distance between the Serampur study and the administrative study can be seen. Fort William College was focusing on the study of Persian, on the study of Sanskrit, on the study of Arabic, as well as on the study of Bengali and Hindustani. So these were the few languages which were studied at Fort William College. At Fort St. George, Tamil, Telugu were the chief languages which were studied by the administrators, by the administrator scholars. But Serampur missionaries still believe in the vernacular languages. So this map was prepared. So this map was actually drawn and engraved by J. Walker, who was a cartographer. So his help were given. So based on the various languages spoken according to the best information compiled for the 7th memoir of translations conducted by Serampur missionary, this map was created. So it was the first exercise to identify Indian region with their spoken languages on the map. It was the first exercise. And as we have discussed that North India is identified as regions of Bikanera, Marwar, Haryana, Bruj, Bundelkhand, Magadha, etc. These languages are identified in North India. Now come the origin of linguistic family. We know the origin of linguistic family is often William Jones is attributed for the origin of linguistic family. But actually in the early modern times in Europe, this kind of study was already there. A primitive kind of comparative linguistics has already developed in Europe in the early modern time, from the 16th century to 18th century. A primitive kind of comparative linguistics has already developed. So what was the reason for the development of that comparative linguistics? It was called comparative philology at that time. So what was the stimulus? There are two stimulus. There was two stimulus. One was the emergence of nationalist ideology towards the chair Ravi Mishra has reflected recently that in France there was a lot of dialects, but with the emergence of nationalist ideology, a particular kind of standard national languages also emerged. So emergence of nationalist ideology was also responsible for the debate in Europe between the classical and vernacular. The classical versus vernacular debate was there in Europe because of the emergence of nationalist ideology. So I cannot go in detail of these issues because they have less importance for Indian case. So the idea of mythical origin, the second was the idea of mythical origin of language. The idea of mythical or biblical idea of mythical origin of language in which it was perceived that languages emerge with the great diaster and they divided with Nu or Noah. So it was the mythical idea of origin, biblical idea of origin of languages. This is often called mosaic ethnology. Here in Europe, there are 2-3 things which are very important in the case of European study of languages. One, language was identified with national identity. Language was identified with ethnicity. Ethnicity was very closely related. So actually why there was so much interest in 18th century Europe on languages? Because a lot of scholars wanted to know the ethnicity of European people. They wanted to trace the primeval primeval language. It was believed that Hebrew was primeval language, but in 18th century this idea was challenged. So what is the primitive language from which other languages may have emerged? So this idea and the idea that language has its family. There might be genealogical origin of languages. All these ideas actually emerged in Europe. So ethnicity and nationality played very important role in the European studies, and these ideas actually came to India with the either they were missionaries or they were administrators. They carried those ideas which evolved in Europe. So it was not simply that Indian languages were studied and whatever idea actually as the scholar who actually criticized Orientalism, a theory which was given by Edward Said, usually argued that indigenous people played very important role in the construction of knowledge. But my point is that most of the ideas came from Europe. So the form, the form and the structure was European, on which Indian data was actually superimposed in this process. So the origin of linguistic family has its history not in India but in Europe. So Indian data put into the form of European knowledge actually. This is the point which I want to make here. Uh, William, what kind of study William Jones has did? William Jones is often, as we know, that he is seen as the father of comparative linguistics. He is the father of Indo-European idea. So what was his study? Actually, he has given 11 lectures on the annual meetings of Asiatic Society, which he has established. So in these 11 lectures, which are often called annual discourse, so in the 11 discourse, 7 from 3rd to 9th were designed to discover the history, culture, religion and language of Asians. 3 to 9th, all these were designed to discover not only the language of Indian people, but Asian people, but the history, culture, religion and languages of Asian people. So in which 5 from 3rd to 7th were especially on 5 presumed ethnicity. He presumed that there are 5 ethnicities in Asia. These are Indian, Arabian, Tatars, Persian and Chinese. These 5 ethnicities, he also believed that they emerged from 3 stocks of Arab, Indian, Arab and Tatar. So in that way, it was ethnocultural study. John also believed in mythical idea of origin of language. So he believed that Noah has 3 sons, and these sons actually migrated. One migrated in Europe, one migrated in Central Asia, one migrated in perhaps India and Iran. And from there, these ethnicity have evolved. So he was very much associated with the mythical origin of the idea of mythical origin of languages. So his study was not particularly a linguistic study. It was actually ethnocultural study of Asian people. So in that process, he has given his discourses from third to 7 discourses. So in the third discourse, which was on the Hindus, the first discourse, the first 2 discourse, it was third because the first was on the establishment of Asiatic society. The second was also how we should work in Asiatic society. The third was particularly ethnic in nature. 4th, 5th, 6th, all were particularly on ethnic nature. So in the third discourse, which was on Hindus, he has given his most popular and most cited point, that Sanskrit language, which is seen as you can see it here and read it here. This is the particular piece which is mostly cited, and it is seen as the originator of the Indo-European family, because in this he has written that Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the language is very strong. You can read it, the language is very strong. More perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either. In any Indian mind, this line can generate some kind of love with William Jones, that more exquisitely refined than idea, yet bearing to both of them a strong affinity, both in the roots of verb and in the form of the grammar, then could possibly have been produced by accident. So strong indeed that no philologer could examine them all 3 without believing them to have sprung from some common source, which perhaps no longer exists. There is similar reason, though not quite so forcible, for supposing that both the Gothic and the Celtic, though blended with a very different idioms, had the same origin with the Sanskrit. And the Old Persian might be added to the same family if there were the place to discussing any question concerning the antiquity of Persia. So this is the most cited text from the William Jones, and it is seen as the this text is seen as the originator of Indo-European family, because this is quoted by Franz Bopp, who studied Indo-European family. He has written the comparative grammar of Indo-European family. He was a German philologist, German linguist, and with that it became a strong idea that there is Indo-European family. Then there was a lot of study by German linguists on that. They focused on the Indo-European family, not other families are studied in Germany. So German focused on Indo-European family. They prepared family tree, which was an oak tree, not a banyan tree. This is not my word. Bernard S. Cohen have written it, that it was a oak tree, not a banyan tree. So a tree was prepared, and in late 19th century in Germany, the first European atlas of languages was also prepared in late 19th century. So cartography was also involved. Even Lebanese in 18th century have said that languages should be depicted on map. So he also suggested cartographic practices. However, it was not there in 18th century. But the important point is that as I studied William Jones in detail, I studied his Persian writing. I studied his other writings. So I find he has sufficient knowledge of Persian. But what he written, that when he make the analogies between the Sanskrit and other languages, he written Greek and Latin first and Persian in the last, and in very dismissive words also. When he compared Sanskrit and Greek, he used strong words. When he compared Sanskrit and Persian, he used very dismissive words. What he wrote, that the old Persian might be added to the same family, if this were the place to discussing any question concerning the antiquities. However, he used Gothic and Celtic before that than Persian. However, Franz Bopp actually shows that Persian is the closest to Sanskrit. And the idea of Indo-Iranian also emerged, that Indo-European was divided in Indo-Iranian, then Indo-Iranian is further divided in Iranian and Indo-Aryan. So Franz Bopp did that in Germany, but William Jones in late 18th century shows that there is difference between Sanskrit and Persian, and there is closeness between Sanskrit and Greek and Latin. So colonialism was also playing in this way also. Similarly, the origin of linguistic family idea in India played very important role. Soon another idea of linguistic family emerged. This was the Dravidian idea. I used to call it Dravidian idea. I have given another lecture, previous lecture on it, so I won't go in detail. I hope, and an occasional paper is also written on it, so it may be published very soon. So Robert Caldwell has written a comparative. So with the German linguist, the idea emerged that comparative grammar should be written. To establish a language family, comparative grammar must be written. Grammars of different languages should be compared to establish that these languages are coming from a language family. So Robert Caldwell used similar techniques which were actually applied by Franz Bopp. And he actually wrote that in the introduction, that I am influenced from Franz Bopp. So he has written a comparative grammar of Dravidian or South Indian family of languages. So again, my point is that forms and structures of European knowledge was actually introduced in India in the preparation of linguistic knowledge. So it was not simply native who involved in the production of knowledge, as sometime argued that native had played very important role. Some scholars are very much interested in the study of these subaltern natives. So, but these subaltern natives, however, provided data, but that linguistic data was actually produced in the structure of linguistic knowledge, which has already prepared in Europe. The structure was ready in Europe. It was ready-made. So the language family idea was ready-made. It was prepared in Europe, not in India. So a similar kind of study was carried out by John Beams. He has written a comparative grammar of modern Aryan languages of India, means the Indo-Aryan languages. He published it in 3 volumes from 1870 to 79. So I am not going in the detail of these 2 comparative grammars, but these 2 comparative grammars were strongly responsible for the development of idea that India has two big linguistic families. However, there was others, but these 2 were the big linguistic families, and these 2 big linguistic families divided India into approximately identical geographical regions, which are the region of Indo-Aryan, the region of Dravidian. So this is the second map which I used here. After the emergence of linguistic family idea, this map is prepared by John Beams himself. However, he prepared it before writing this comparative grammar. He prepared it. He was writing another book in 1860s when he received the comparative grammar of Dravidian languages. He took the idea that these are the Dravidian languages. He did not study them, but he used the idea which was developed by Robert Caldwell and depicted it on a map before writing comparative grammar. So this map was prepared in 1867. This is part of Outline of Indian Philology, a book which was written by John Beams. He is also seen as a father of Oriya language because he was very much instrumental in the debate, in the emergence of modern Oriya language. And there was debate in late 19th century between the Bengali elites and Oriya elite. Oriya elite were arguing that Bengali has controlled all the teaching jobs in Odisha, so Oriya should be implemented as the language of Odisha. And Bengali, especially the Bengali intellectuals argued that Oriya is a dialect of Bengali. This is not a language, this is a dialect. So John Beams actually intervened in the debate, and he argued linguistically. Linguistically, he argued that Oriya is a different language. It is a language. He has prepared some methodology which should be called a language, which should be called a dialect. So how he argued that Oriya is a language, not a dialect? He shows that Oriya has more Sanskrit vocabulary than Bengali. So in this way, Oriya is less corrupt than Bengali because a lot of Muslim rulers came in Bengal, not in Odisha. So Oriya retained Sanskrit terms more frequently than Bengali. So this is a different language. So linguistically he argued, and his argument were taken off by the Oriya elites also. So now we come to this map. In this map he depicted 2 areas. I hope I have 5 minutes only. Okay, then I should move fast. So in this map actually he has depicted 2 areas. The area of Indo-Aryan language and the area of Dravidian language. But here I don't know, this is not readable because this become very small. He has used the term Indo-Germanic languages to show this area. To show this area he used Indo-Germanic, and to show this area he used Turanian languages, not the Dravidian. Dravidian term which was used by Caldwell, he did not use this term because sometimes this is believed that South Indian languages were part of Turanian languages in European scholarship, and because of the influence of German linguists, the Indo-European were by German scholars were usually called Germanic languages or Indo-Germanic languages. This term was used by German scholars, German linguists. However, British linguists were opposed to that. There was whole debate what should be the name of this family, Indo-European or Indo-Germanic. So he did not, John Beams did not understand this debate. He used the term Indo-Germanic and Turanian. But the interesting thing that he used two colors. However, I did not get any information why he used these two colors. The North Indian part was shown red. Actually, this is, आपको लग रहा है कि ये orange है, but this is red, and the below was blue. So two colors were shown here in this map to depict two languages. You can see that where two languages are mixing, both the lines are created. He has written in text that there was mixing of languages in this part. He has written in the text. So he he has given both the colors on some part. So we come to the next part. So now, after the emergence of linguistic family idea, this has become very much important idea, and in the till the mid 19th century, with the establishment of technometric survey, Indian districts were studied, and languages, spoken languages in a particular district were also, the information was also collected on that basis by some scholars, not in a form of survey, but some knowledge was there. So Robert Needham Cust, who came in India in 1940s, actually 1948, he was an ICS officer, mostly appointed in Punjab. He was the scholar who argued that Punjabi is a different language. So every Orientalist was also involved in the promotion of one language also either Odia or Punjabi or Telugu or Tamil. And the method which was used was, the words which were used was in such a praise that people who spoke that language should align themselves. This kind of language was actually used. So because he was appointed in Punjab, so he wanted that Punjabi should be implemented. In 1860, he wrote a Cust rule to argue for Punjabi as a different language. Farina Mir has shown in a very good work that Punjabi, which was written in two scripts, Indo-Persian as well as in Gurumukhi. Mostly it was missionaries who used only Gurumukhi script for writing Punjabi. So after that, Cust also did that practice. So these scholars, whether missionary or administrator, they argued that Punjabi has also a religion. So identification of language, not only with ethnicity, but with religion. For example, in case of Urdu and Hindi. Similarly, in case of Punjabi. In case of South India, Tamil was identified with the Dalit people also, with the Shanars, because Caldwell was working among the Shanars. He played very important role in conversion of Shanars in South India, Tirunelveli. So with the identification of caste also. So this Robert Needham Cust wrote a book which published in 1878, A Sketch of Modern Languages of East Indies. So it was a unique blend of knowledge of cartography and Indian languages, because cartographic knowledge was also available till the mid 19th century. Judith Irwin has written that why it was the map which he prepared, it actually was in 6-7 parts. 6-7 part the map has been prepared, and I am thankful to the reprography section of PMML to help me to make it in one part. I show the map. This is the one map. However, I left the areas of Indochina, Indonesia, and East and another part. This map is prepared on the basis of 2 parts of the map. So it was a big map, as Judith Irwin has has written that that their level of detail and large scale, it was a large scale map. So he was the person who has both the knowledge of languages as well as knowledge of cartography. That was, he was able to make such kind of good map. So what are the important feature of this map? So what he did actually, Cust himself did a comprehensive linguistic survey to produce the book. For gathering primary information on languages and preparing language map, Cust actually relied on missionary information from the civil service servant, information from the travelers were gathered. Okay, some special features were
You
in
have
this map.
already given us so much food for thought. I'm afraid there will be many questions. So
I am completing in
request
5
you to
minutes.
conclude and let's carry on the discussion.
Okay. So there are some special feature in this map. Language families where language families with different colors are shown. Major languages are shown with capital letters. North in India was shown as Hindi, but northwest frontier was shown as Punjabi. Clear demarcation of boundaries and language field was the specialty of this map. He used the term language field because he was the man of revenue collection. So he used the term language field. So, and the most important thing, that he was the mentor of George Grierson. He was the mentor of George Grierson. So this is the map. You can see in this map the colors are used. Here in below he used the family names and the color given to the maps. In the big font, for example, Hindi is written, other languages name is written in capital letters. The name of dialects is written in bracket actually, but in his another map which he prepared on Africa, he written the name of dialect in small letters to show the subfamilies. So because he mentored George Grierson, so I am not using the George Grierson's map here. So George Grierson in the Linguistic Survey of India, he actually accepted some things. However, this study was also very important, but I am not going in detail of this study. I am still studying his 11 volume, 19 part of his linguistic survey. What he has written, we can understand that how it was very difficult to create boundaries of languages. He has written in the introduction. Why I was working at Eastern Hindi, Dr. Sten Kono was simultaneously working at Marathi, each working independently. We finally met at the junction point where the curious mixed dialect called Hubli is spoken. From the point of view of Eastern Hindi, I considered that it was a form of Marathi. On the other hand, Dr. Kuno, looking at it through Marathi spectacles, maintained that it was a form of Eastern Hindi. As the last word remained with me, the dialect appeared in Marathi volume of the survey. But if it had been put in the volumes of Eastern Hindi, I could not have said that it was wrongly placed. So this was the last sentence. This is the last sentence. Because the Grierson survey was prepared in 20th century, when there was a strong movement for the national language. So what he did, he divided the national language of Indian nationalists in 3 parts. What he did, when these about the North Indian languages, I am talking about the North Indian language which was seen as the Hindustani area. When these numerous so-called dialects of this Hindi are examined by the philologist, and when he attempted to group and classify, as he at once confronted by radical differences of idioms and construction, to look upon all these as dialect of a single language is as philologically impossible as it would be, say, to describe German as a dialect of English, and hence in the linguistic survey, they have been sorted out according to their grammatical system into 3 groups, each of which is given the dignity of language: Bihari, Eastern Hindi and Western Hindi. So the Hindi or Hindustani, which was seen as a proclaimed national language of India, was divided in 3 parts. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
We are all very thankful to Dr. Iliyas Husain for this brilliant survey of linguistic cartography of India as it evolved in the 19th century. And I thank all members of the audience for their presence and for their very enthusiastic participation. And of course, let's carry on the discussion over tea. Thank you very much.